Okay, welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We're standing here once again on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railways, Dorion and then Kinghorn subdivision. We are just on the west side of what is known as Grandview Beach Road here in the municipality of Shuniah. And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be picking up right where we left off on the previous hike, which we did last fall. And we are going to be working our way to the west. This is actually a rather long hike. It's just over 5 miles, which is a little bit longer than we normally do. But we did this in this way because we wanted to shorten, or I wanted to shorten the next section, and it'll become apparent why we did that. So we're going to start working our way to the west here. A couple of notes here. We're going to be, there's a lot of access roads that we're going to be crossing here in Shuniah as they work their way down to the lake. I'm trying to try to remember I have them all marked on my GPS, but I'm going to try to remember all of the names for them, because we're going to be crossing quite a number of them. And we're going to be kind of weaving out of these areas where you're going to see properties and things like that adjacent to the grade. It is a beautiful day. It is the beginning of May. It's the 10th of May. Most of the snow has gone away here. You'll just see little patches of it here and there. I've been kind of sounding like a broken record here because I've been saying this on a lot of our recent hikes, that we had a pretty bad winter, a lot of snow, and then we had maybe even worse spring because we had a lot of snow in the spring as well. And the snow probably just started going away about 2 weeks ago, that we've actually started having some nice weather. So our first little point of interest here, so we can see that there is a junction box for the fiber. There is a very important fiber optic line that runs alongside the grade. So you can see the mileage, 185.96. And so that is the mileage on the Kinghorn subdivision. I'll be talking a little bit about the different lines here. And so for the original lines, the Canadian Northern Railway Nipissing subdivision and the Canadian National Railways Dorion subdivision, we need to subtract 49.7 miles because those lines started in Jellicoe, not Longlac. And so the mileage on those lines becomes 136.26, I believe, if my math is right. Okay, so we got a section here where there's quite a bit of ballast. You can hear there's obviously with the amount of snow that we had this winter, there's a lot of runoff. Spring is very late this year. We're probably about 3 weeks behind where we were last year. So here you can see there's a creek flowing alongside the grade and then under the grade, and there is a culvert here, but there is no marker. There's no mileage marker. As well, with the junction box there, there should have been a milepost marker here. So milepost 186 should have been around here somewhere, and it's very ironic because if you look at a Google Street View of this area, and I think the pictures were taken like 2012-ish, you can actually see the milepost marker still here. So it was here at one point. I guess in the last 10 years somebody has borrowed it. Now we have been through this section before. It's not a redo, but we did come and sort of take a look at this, and that would have been in January 2021. So not this January, the previous January. We're going to point this out at several junctions here. You can see the sleeping giant here, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. You can see that there is some thin ice left on Lake Superior. Just trying to get out of the thicker part of the ballast here. You can see some of the beautiful homes and things like that along the lake. I've mentioned this on previous hikes that this lakefront property here is usually quite sought after and very expensive. I mean, quite literally, you have a $1 million view. I mean, you don't get too many places with a view like that. So we are in the municipality of Shuniah, but eventually we will be approaching the city of Thunder Bay. And when we get to a place called Wild Goose Beach, I'll talk a little bit more about the sleeping giant, and I will talk a little bit more about the bay. Culvert here milepost marker, but illegible, can't read it. All right, so we got so engrossed in our exploration of this area, is probably because I was mentioning the culvert that's here, and so I've totally missed and forgot about the marker that we have here. So these are very rare. We don't really see very many of these. So these are basically the whistle marker, or the whistle sign, whistle post. I don't know what the proper term for it is, but basically indicating, because we do have the crossing coming up at Grandview Beach Road, and so to signal the engine crew to start sounding the whistle. So I wanted to make sure that we pointed that out again, because these are very, very rare. Okay, so maybe while we have a minute here, we'll do our usual history lesson, just make sure Luna's tagging along here. It is a long, again, it's a long hike. So 5 miles, just over 8 kilometers is a pretty far way to go. So this line was constructed by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. This was going to be one of the final pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental ambitions. The Canadian Northern Railway got its start in Manitoba in 1896. Started buying up some rail lines and some charters and things like that. Their first big project was the construction of a line between the then city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay, and Winnipeg, and that project was complete in 1902. See, we're passing through a little piece of rock cut here, only maybe 3 feet high, 4 feet high at the most. Not really a lot of rock work in this area. And they eventually started building lines throughout the prairies, and they also started building north from Toronto, eventually reaching into the Sudbury area. And it came to a point where Canadian Northern realized that the long-term sort of viability of their company depended on them sort of building a transcontinental line. You can see some of the, again, some of the beautiful homes here, some older style ones that have been here for a while, and some very new kind of modern ones that you can see. A little bit more rock work here. And so Canadian Northern really did not want to build from the Sudbury area, specifically Ruel, to Port Arthur. I'm just going to hold up a second. There's a couple gentlemen here who are using a log splitter. It's probably loud. So Canadian Northern did not want to build this section of line because the construction was going to be very difficult, therefore very expensive, and they kind of wondered a little bit about sort of the profitability of this piece of line. And so what ended up happening was they did try to, you know, look at some other arrangements, in particular trying to get a running rights agreement with Canadian Pacific. None of that panned out. Again, you can see another view here of the sleeping giant. And so they were forced to build, and so again the construction lasted from 1911 until 1914. So on New Year's Day, so January 1st, 1914, the last spike was driven on this line. And so it opened for traffic, the line opened for traffic in 1950. Now unfortunately, the construction of sections like this and some of the places through the mountains of British Columbia, I'll give you a little view here of the sleeping giant up on this very high embankment, basically bankrupted Canadian Northern, coupled with a lot of the financial stresses of World War I. And so by 1917, the company was essentially insolvent, had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And in 1918, they were forced to amalgamate, merge, whatever word that you want to use, with a bunch of other Canadian government-owned bankrupt lines known as the Canadian Government Railways. And that merger produced Canadian National Railways. We're coming up to a little rock cut here. It's probably one of the biggest rock cuts in this whole sort of area here. You don't really find too much rock work. So you can see it's on both sides of the grade. and it's probably in about the 7-foot range or so. I was kind of looking as I came through on the outbound journey, and of course with the appropriate graffiti on it. And so with the creation of Canadian National Railways, we'll let Luna have a drink here. With the creation of Canadian National Railways, that process was complete in 1923 with the absorption of the Grand Trunk Line. So in 1923, the name of this line changed from the Nipigon Subdivision of Canadian Northern Railway to the Dorion Subdivision of Canadian National Railways. And then it continued as such until 1960, when there was a big reorganization with Canadian National. They adopted their modern iconic logo, the worm logo, changed their name from Canadian National Railways, plural, to Canadian National Railway. And then one of their changes was they merged this line, so the Dorion subdivision, with the more easterly Kinghorn subdivision, and the whole line became the Kinghorn subdivision. And then it continued operating until 2005, when CN decided to discontinue service. And starting in 2008, they began ripping up the rails, and that process was complete by 2010. All right, so we're going to hold up here for a second, and then we're going to resume our journey to the west.